Hello, John Paul Rodrigues. How are you?
Good. How are you doing, Maya?
I'm fine, thank you. It's very nice to see you, and thank you for being a guest on Who Cares for the Wicked series. You invited me to be a guest on your show, so I'm happy to have you as my guest today. And today it's my turn to ask you some questions about what you do. So I will just start by maybe have you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Perfect. So yeah, it's always interesting now being on the other side, just like I was
Mhm.
talking with you a couple of weeks ago. So my name is JP Rodrigues. I'm the paralegal program coordinator at Trials College. I'm also an instructor at Centennial College and Seneca College for paralegal students and law clerk students. I do still have a little bit of my foot in criminal defense work. I mean, I'm pretty much only working as telephone duty counsel, a few hours a week here and there to supplement what I'm doing teaching and coordinating the program. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much me in a nutshell. As of course, I have a legal podcast or YouTube series like yourself, Justice in Pieces, where I interview lawyers, paralegals, judges, politicians, whoever. Primarily, my audience is my paralegal students, but I think newly licensed lawyers, paralegals can all benefit from listening to some of the people I've had on as well, including yourself.
Yes, and it was very nice. It was a very nice interview, so thank you for that. But going back a little bit about on what you do, so you're mostly teaching now, but you are also a lawyer, and you, as you mentioned, you do some duty counsel phone work. How did that switch happen though? Because you were originally a lawyer and then you got into teaching, right? Or was it the other way around?
Well, it's kind of so when I finished law school, before I started articling, I went over to China of all places, and I was teaching law there for a couple of years. So I really liked it. It was an interesting experience. I can go on about what it was like there, but had a lot of fun with it. And then I came back. I articled at a multifaceted practice, but they were predominantly doing criminal work. So I did my articles there, finished, and stayed on for about 9 months afterwards. And then I was kind of looking at starting up my own practice, and I was looking at ways to kind of supplement. And I said, I really like teaching. Is there opportunities to teach? And lo and behold, there was this opportunity to teach paralegal students at Charles College. And I thought, initially it was just one or two classes, and I would still focus on practicing. And then, after a while, I just found that, I really like teaching. And slowly that formula went from, 50-50 to like 95%, I would say now, teaching and paralegal coordinating versus practicing law.
Okay, so they kind of started at the same time, both the teaching and the law, but now it's predominantly teaching as opposed to practicing in
Yeah,
law.
pretty
Okay.
much. Yeah. I mean, so, again, it was kind of trying to do both at the beginning. And I found, it's very difficult, obviously, the more you teach that, hey, if a client or somebody were to call you, or if you needed to do even duty counsel work in the daytime, if they wanted, I wouldn't be able to, or just, you need to sleep at some point too, right? So I
Right.
just found that, what I can do now is mostly coordinating, teaching, and a very little bit of duty counsel work just to kind of stay sharp about what's going on and things like that.
And how long have you been teaching, John Paul?
So I would say, so I did the 2 years in China were in 2009 and 2010. So since then, pretty much, other than a couple years I had where I was just practicing, I've been teaching paralegal since 2015. So I would say about 10 years total between all of those.
Nice. And why are you teaching paralegals?
So I mean, that was essentially the first opportunity I got. And when I started, I didn't realize, in terms of what paralegals can do. And I think a lot of our colleagues don't realize, when they hear the word paralegals, and I call it the Meghan Markle effect, because lots of people probably grew up watching Suits, and they saw when she was a paralegal, initially in the show, that it's a lot of legal admin, legal assistant kind of work. But everywhere else in the world, that's kind of the term when they think of paralegals, of who they would associate with. But in Ontario, since 2007, right, that they've been licensed to provide legal services, and within their scope, they can do pretty much anything we can do as lawyers within that area of practice. And it was really interesting to me to realize that this is a great opportunity for people who may not otherwise get the opportunity to go to law school time wise, financially, that they can get into this field right out of high school, and within a year or 2 years be ready to write their licensing exam, practice, and provide legal services to the community.
Nice. And so as you explained, paralegals actually are not just, they don't just do administrative work. They actually do a little bit of more substantive work in criminal law. But we also know that recently the Law Society has been expanding the role of paralegals, and it seems like they're able to do a lot more than they were able to do before. And for some lawyers, they perceive that as a threat, and that it is maybe competition, because paralegals typically charge less than lawyers. I was wondering, what is your take on that, John Paul? Do you consider, or do you see that as a threat? Do you perceive this expansion of the role of the paralegal as a good thing or as a bad thing? And if you see it from the point of view of a lawyer, is it fair to see it as a threat, or do you think that it is not an issue?
Well, I mean, it's always interesting, I think, because I can put on the lawyer hat and then I can put on the
Yeah.
paralegal instructor hat, because I hear certainly the concerns from lawyers. And I hear the concerns from the paralegal community, who are like, well, why can't we do these kinds of things, right? And why are they restrictions? And certainly some see it as kind of a battle of turf, right? I mean, in terms of, even I was interviewing a number of people over the bencher elections, and there's that concern, right, is about lawyers and paralegals. But I think everyone forgets that it's in the interest of access to justice, right? And the area, I mean, there wouldn't be a need or a demand for that kind of service if it was being fulfilled, right? I mean, there's so many people in areas like the small claims court, in family law, right, where they are self-represented. And the changes that the Law Society had made last year are designed to at least put a little foothold in there and have paralegals address that gap, right? So for what's there, and it's a lot less in the end what happened from what was proposed. And I think part of that is the concern, certainly from lawyers or even the judiciary, of can paralegals handle this work, this scope in this field, compared to the time that lawyers have gone in, right? So like for you and I, perhaps we went through university. You had like a 4-year program, 3 years of law school, almost a year of articling in the end, and you're looking at that as 8 years, versus, as I said, some people can finish a program in a year. And they have, recently they've upgraded, from 120 minimum hours of like internship to 240. It's going to go in place next year. But when you're kind of comparing that, it's sometimes difficult for lawyers to think, hey, can these paralegals do the same things as we can? But the other thing is that when you look back at our education, a lot of it wasn't very practical, right? And I know law schools are certainly trying these days to do more things. I remember talking to someone when we were looking at contract law, and we learned, about Hadley and Baxendale and all these cases. But
Mhm.
I mean, how many classes that pulled out a contract and said, well, these are the terms that go in a contract. This is how you would draft a contract. These are the things to look for. These are possible issues, right? And I think you're getting more practical education now for paralegals, and that's more of an emphasis. So the hope is that if that is the source of their training, that they can handle these things within their scope. And I know with family law, there's going to be, I believe, a 3-month post-licensing program available. I'm not sure what schools are going to offer it, but after you have your P1 license, you can go and do that for 3 months, and then you'll have the ability to be a family law legal service provider, FLSP, which is what the designation is, that would allow them to do some work in that limited scope. Right now, of course, lawyers are going to say, hey, what's the need for that? But again, there's so many people in family law that are going unrepresented, that it provides a more affordable option at their disposal if they can't hire a lawyer, right? And I think when we see competition, it's largely in areas that lawyers are not going into as much, right? So things like
Yeah, there's
small claims
provincial
court,
offenses
provincial
as
offenses,
well. Yeah,
landlord tenant, right? These are in WSI B, WSI AT area. So that competition is not really there because it's not really the areas that lawyers are tending to practice in. Certainly, we could be going into those areas if we want to, but at the same time, um, the demand is there, right? The demand is there for all of these legal services. It's just a matter of, is there enough supply, and is there enough supply at that pricing point that people are looking for? And I think when you look at it that way, it's again an access to justice issue of making sure we're able to provide affordable legal representation for the people that need it. And if the people that can afford lawyers' rates are going to jump to go to the lawyers, then they shouldn't see that as a perceived competition, because the people that are going to go to the paralegals, they're going to be the ones who would otherwise generally be unrepresented.
that's true. And in terms of what you teach, John Paul, do you teach only criminal to paralegals, or do you also teach the other areas of law that you mentioned, family and small claims?
So not family. We don't. Family law is not in the scope of in terms of the education yet. And again, it's only
Okay.
going to be available outside of the paralegal programs at the respective schools. So it'll be something again after you finish and get your license. But for those who are studying to be a paralegal, I've pretty much taught every kind of course that I've had some experience with. Like I said, when I was initially practicing working at a firm. So. Criminal law, of course, but anything like um, alternative dispute resolution. Also looking, I mean, a number of different courses, pretty much you name it, practice management, legal research and writing. So I've kind of had experience teaching a number of the courses, but I do certainly enjoy teaching criminal law and alternative dispute resolution. Great classes, and very interactive and engaging, and it's just a great opportunity then to see the paralegal students finish. I just got to see a couple convocations over the last couple of weeks, and the joy on their faces, their friends, family in the audience, and then the next step is getting prepared for the licensing exam, and then becoming licensed and hopefully going on and practicing.
Nice. And when you do practice law, I mean, we know you do part-time duty. That's, I'm assuming, criminal duty counsel that you do.
Yes.
And so when you are a practicing lawyer, do you practice exclusively in criminal, or do you practice in other areas of law as well?
So right now, I'm pretty much only doing the criminal
Teaching.
duty counsel work,
Yeah.
right? So in terms of practice, the calls that come in at the odd hours, usually arrest calls, right? So providing legal advice for people who have been detained, some immigration detentions as well. Otherwise, I mean, I've had previously doing quasi criminal kind of. The immigration consultants had a body. It was then the ICCRC. They had a discipline panel, so I did a few of those matters. But predominantly, most of the work is doing duty counsel, telephone work, and then just transitioned pretty much into program coordinating and teaching over the last couple of years.
Okay. And do paralegals want to expand their area of practice? Is this something that they are hoping will happen in the future, that they will be able to do more, or are they just, or do they just want to be doing whatever it is that they're doing right now? Like, what is the general feel or vibe right now?
Right. So right now I know there's a litigation going on with the Law Society about expansion of scope into immigration. So right now, just for
Mhm.
anyone who's wondering, paralegals can do immigration appeals and refugee protection division and refugee appeals at the Immigration and Refugee Board. So they can do the board work because they can appear before these tribunals. But what they cannot do are the initial application. So if somebody wanted to hire a person to do their sponsorship visa or a student visa or anything like that, it's out
That
of
has
their
to be a
scope.
lawyer.
That has to be a lawyer or an immigration
Consult.
consultant.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and then lawyers can only do the federal court work that goes through the appeal. Immigration consultants can do the applications, and if they have I think a designation now to appear before the Immigration Refugee Board, paralegals can just do the stuff before the Immigration Refugee Board. And they're saying, well, if we can do the appeals, then what's the
Why
logic in
can't we
not
do
letting
the
us do the
first instance?
application,
I
right?
know it's a bit weird.
And so that's the biggest area they're looking in terms of expansion of scope, or clarifying if that indeed is in their scope, depending on what the Superior Court decides. And, you know, of course, there could be potential further appeals there, but that's what they're looking at. And I think, of course, the law society can make a decision to allow them to do that. Family law, again, what they've gotten maybe is like the first step. If, you know, we see that after this 3-month program that people take advantage of and they start doing work, if things are going well, then hopefully, you know, from their perspective, right, that can be expanded further. The law society can revisit it in a few years to see what the result has been, and what's you know, again, we want to make sure anyone providing legal services, lawyers or paralegals or even immigration consultants, are doing so competently. So we'll reevaluate. I guess the law society will reevaluate, and hopefully that's an area that they're looking at. I think as well, divisional court appeals. So paralegals cannot appear before the divisional court, but they can appear in terms of, let's say, a landlord tenant or a small claims matter. But if someone wants to take it further, they're not able to appear as on the appeal. And of course, in criminal law, I think one of the things there's certainly to explain is paralegals can appear on most summary conviction matters. If you go back to the 2019 amendments, I think it was Bill C-75, that previously anything that was up to a maximum of 6 months on a summary matter, that's still within their scope today. So it's a little bit tricky on a lot of our hybrid matters, because until an election is made on the record, you know, it's presumed to be by indictment, which is out of their scope. So, I mean, I don't think there's much, you know, in wanting to move on the criminal aspect, but certainly on immigration and family and maybe divisional court appeals. And of course, on the criminal side, is that's a great resource for criminal defense lawyers, is to maybe employ paralegals, because again, you think of paralegals as just providing legal support or assistance, or like a law clerk kind of role, which they can help with, you know, maybe your PC law docketing, or maybe in terms of scheduling and things like that. But they can also do those set date appearances. They can also do an application. They can also even run trials, right, all the way up there. So if you're looking maybe at wanting to hire like an associate, and you're thinking, well, do I have the budget for this? Well, you can
Yeah.
hire a paralegal. I mean, they can certainly bill out, and it could be affordable rather than try to refer it out of the firm, right, to keep it there and work out some kind of arrangement there, because they can do a lot more than just maybe your legal assistant kind of work. But that's an area certainly to pay attention to, is that they have the scope in criminal law to do most of those summary conviction matters.
Because that's actually what I wanted to ask you then. What would be the difference between a paralegal and an associate, like especially a first or second year uh, um, lawyer? It seems like it's a little bit similar, because also, I mean, a first year associate does a little bit of, I mean, not too much admin, but it's set dates where we also see paralegals, remands, bail hearings. Okay. So one thing maybe you can clarify for me, I'm not too sure, can paralegals do bail hearings?
Well, my understanding is no, because I mean, I think, I suppose, if it was a straight summary matter that for whatever reason they were being detained on, but my understanding is no, because at that point there hasn't been an election made on the charge whether to proceed
Mhm.
by summary conviction or by indictment. So I think at that point, because it's presumed to be by
Right.
indictment, it's out of their scope. So my understanding is no on the bail hearings. I suppose, you know, if it was a straight summary for whatever reason, like
Yeah.
a public nudity detention, I think maybe that might be the only exception to it. But for bail hearings, I think that's completely out of their
Out of
scope.
their scope.
But I mean, once that election is made, right, all of those set dates they can appear on, right? They can do the Crown pre-trials, they can do the judicial pre-trials, they can do the charter applications, right? Or they can even be second chair and assist on the trials, or even
But as
do,
long as it's a summary proceeding, though.
as long as it's most summary
Okay.
proceedings. There's a few summary matters where the maximum sentence was before 6 months, like I think impaired driving, for example, that I believe are out of their scope because of that, because they weren't in their scope in 2019. And even though now summary conviction matters are up to 2 years less a day, there's a little bit of a distinction of a few of them that aren't in their scope, but the vast majority are.
Okay. So I mean, like that would be then something to consider if someone is trying to hire. Obviously, I mean, though bail is a big component, so that's something that they can't do. But I mean, otherwise, there are so many other things that they can also assist. Um, any law firm, I guess. And do you feel, John Paul, that there are more and more paralegals now? Is this, I mean, for someone who's been teaching paralegals for quite some time now, do you feel that there is an expansion, that there are more paralegals, or do you see that it's the opposite, that we're having less, and that's why maybe the Law Society is trying to expand their scope just to encourage more people? What is your observation about that?
Well, I think, I mean, there was a big increase that I noticed certainly when during the pandemic, because classes were
Mhm.
remote, and maybe that was for a lot of other education institutions, right? And then any program that the ability to do it remotely or online. However, since we've been back in person, I think there's a little bit of a drop up, but overall, I think it's pretty much been consistent. And I think the more people realize now, if you were coming out of high school or even out of university and you're thinking, hey, I want to get involved in law, but I'm mostly interested in maybe small claims or something different, or just a timeline, right? That you can look at. Well, by the time a year and a half from now, I can finish a program, a 1-year program. I can prepare for the licensing exam, and I can start taking clients. Within 18 months of having that thought. If it's June 2023, by the end of 2024, I think maybe March 2025, you can be licensed and providing legal services in a number of fields, right? Even in criminal law, right? I mean, you're still seeing the vast majority being summary conviction matters. So if you really wanted to do criminal defense work, you could do it as a paralegal. I mean, you might not get everything, but you could. Or if you were looking at small claims, the maximum cap is 35,000, right? So a lot of these disputes happen to be under 35,000. Or any tribunal, like there's lots of work in WSIB, Human Rights Tribunal, and the list goes on. So when you're looking at it there, I think that there's slowly, it's stabilized, but I think there's a lot more interest when people are comparing, the cost of going to law school. I mean, I don't know what it was for you, but even, back in 2006 to 2009, it was, I think about 20,000 approximately a year. And I can only imagine, I heard someone saying it was 40,000 at some schools a year right now. So if you're looking at that and you're thinking about all that time, and it might be a more favorable consideration to say, well, I can do this in as little as 18 months, be ready to take on clients. And the other thing is, like I said, there's a little bit more practical focus. So when people are thinking, you were asking me before, what about a first year associate versus a paralegal versus, a law clerk or a legal administrator or legal
Yeah.
assistant? Well, I mean, you kind of get someone that you can mold. I mean, that they have certainly some practical knowledge of the law in that area, but they can do all of those things like a legal assistant can do, but then they can also go and appear in court and really take on files as much as you want to sort of build them up and work with them, right? And certainly there's a lot of paralegals that are working in criminal law that do just that, and they can even be in some places, I think you can have a mixed discipline practice where they can become partners even, right? So I mean, that certainly gives you an advantage over just hiring a legal assistant. And then compared to an associate lawyer, of course, if you're having a lot of indictable matters, if you're having a lot of bail hearings, then it makes more sense to get the first year, second year, third year, whoever associate. But you got to also look at the cost, right? So I think it provides another opportunity in terms of flexibility for a small sole practitioner or small law firm of, hey, I want to take on or keep some of these clients instead of referring them out, but I don't necessarily have enough work to take on a full-time associate and pay what a full-time first-year associate lawyer is looking for.
That's true. I mean, that's very interesting, and it's probably some things to consider that I hope lawyers who are watching this episode will take that into account, and maybe will help them when they're hiring to consider paralegals, that they could also add to the practice as well. Well, John Paul, it was really very nice to see you and to chat with you today, and to hear a bit more about paralegals and what they do, and how you're helping training them. So thank you so much for your work. Thank you for the time that you took for this interview today. It's always nice to see you, and we'll keep in touch and see how things are going as well with you in the future.
Perfect. So thank you so much again, Maya, and thanks everyone.
Thank you for your time, John Paul.